Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
Today, we're walking into a structure that most of us inhabit every single day, often without ever seeing the blueprints. We are conducting a structural analysis of a collection of essays titled The House That Race Built, edited by Wahneema Lubiano.
And when we say the house, we should be clear. We aren't speaking metaphorically about, a specific building on a specific street.
No, not at all.
We are talking about the United States itself.
Precisely. The central thesis of this deep dive, and really the mission for our systems analysis today, is that race is not a decoration. It's not a bug, and it's not just a remodeling project gone wrong.
Right.
Race is the load-bearing wall. It is the foundation. It is, the very architecture within which American democracy lives.
And this is a heavy stack of papers we're working through today. I mean, you've got essays from literary giants like Toni Morrison, activists like Angela Davis, and then legal scholars like Kimberly Crenshaw and Neil Gotanda.
The powerhouse collection.
It really is. And I want to set the stage here because usually when we talk about racism in the media or, in popular culture, we tend to talk about bad apples. We talk about individual prejudice, someone saying something hateful, or a politician with a backwards view.
That is exactly what Wahneema Lubiano identifies in her introduction as the crisis in perception.
Okay, there's our title.
There it is.
Mm.
She argues that we are trained to see racism as a matter of bad attitudes or individual pathology. The idea that if we just fix the people, we fix the problem.
Get rid of the bad apples and the barrel is clean.
Right. But this text argues it's completely missing the point. It argues that race acts as a distorting prism. It's a structural necessity for the current political economy.
A structural necessity. Hold on, that's a massive claim. So what she's saying is the system doesn't just have racism in it, it needs racism to function.
Yes. That is the absolute core of the primary system design we need to unpack. Lubiano argues that the United States maintains itself as a structure through oppression.
Through it, not despite it.
Exactly. She writes that if race and its strategic deployment as racism didn't exist, the severe inequalities and the constant betrayal of democratic promises would be too obvious.
Too obvious for people to accept.
Yes, too obvious to the citizenry. Race provides the cover story. It allows the majority to imagine themselves as moral and just people while ignoring widespread devastation happening right in front of them.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are not here today to moralize or say who's good or bad. That's not the point of this deep dive.
No, absolutely not.
We want to see how the plumbing works, how the walls were framed, and maybe, just maybe, understand why the doors seem to lock from the outside.
That's the perfect way to frame it. We're going to look at the architecture, the narrative layer that, keeps it looking nice, the operational mechanisms like the law, and the feedback loops that keep the whole thing running.
All right, let's start with that architecture then, the primary system design. Toni Morrison contributes an essay here called Home. Now, reading Toni Morrison is always a revelation, but in this essay, she's writing very specifically about this metaphor of the race house.
Morrison's essay is just vital because she articulates the dilemma of living inside this structure. She describes her struggle as a writer. She says, and I'm paraphrasing a bit here, "I have never lived, nor has any of us, in a world in which race did not matter."
It's always been there.
It's always been there. And she rejects the idea of a race-free world as, I love this phrase, a theme park or a dreamscape.
A theme park. That's such a specific and slightly dismissive image. It implies something artificial, something you visit to escape reality for a couple of hours.
Exactly. She wants to deal with reality. She talked about the temptation to just leave the house, to try and write without race, to transcend it.
Which sounds noble. Right. That's what a lot of people say they want.
It sounds like the goal. But she realizes it's a trap. She says she couldn't just walk out. If she leaves the race house, she becomes homeless.
Homeless.
There is no language, no narrative ground outside of this structure. It's the only house we have. She writes, counter-racism was never an option. Because counter-racism is still playing by the house rules.
You're still defining yourself in opposition to the thing that was built to contain you.
You're still reacting to the master's voice, as she puts it.
So, okay, if you can't leave the house and you can't burn it down without burning yourself up with it, what do you do? I mean, that sounds incredibly claustrophobic.
It is, and she describes it that way. She calls the race house a windowless prison, a thick-walled, impenetrable container. And this brings us right to the core of the structural dilemma. How do you renovate a house that was built on specific exclusions without ending up on the street?
That's the question.
She asks, could I redecorate, redesign, even reconceive the racial house without forfeiting a home of my own? Her goal as a writer, she says, is to convert that prison into an open house.
An open house. So, grounded, race-specific, but generous. Not trying to pretend the walls don't exist, but maybe putting in some windows and doors.
Exactly. It's fascinating because she frames this not as like an emotional journey, but as a structural puzzle. How do you live in a house built on exclusion without becoming an agent of that exclusion yourself?
And that question forces us to look at the incentives. Why was the house built this way in the first place? I mean, there had to be a reason.
And according to Lubiano, that reason is to achieve the consent of the governed.
Wait a minute, consent of the governed sounds like a good thing? That's democracy 101. Ideally, it means the government works for us, so we agree to follow its laws.
In theory, yes. But Lubiano's argument is that the state and the political economy are actually, her word is inimical, or hostile to most of the U.S. citizenry.
Not just black people, but most people.
Most people. Think about it. We have massive wealth inequality, a frayed or non-existent social safety net, precarious labor. The system is pretty hostile to the average person. So to keep people from revolting against that hostility, the system offers a bribe.
A bribe. And that bribe is?
It racializes poverty and crime.
So poverty gets a black face in the public imagination.
Exactly. Even though numerically white poverty is rampant, the public imagination sees poverty as a black issue. Crime becomes synonymous with blackness. And this allows the non-black majority to consent to a system that might actually be hurting them economically.
Because they can look at the race house and say, well, things might be tough for me, but at least I'm not that.
Precisely. It legitimizes the entire structure. Howard Wahneema, in his essay, has a name for this. He calls it a Herrenvolk democracy.
Herrenvolk. That's a loaded term. It means master race, essentially.
Yes, a democracy for the master race.
Yeah.
Historically, this was explicit, right? You had democracy, but only for white men with property.
Sure, that's just history.
But Wahneema argues that even after overt segregation ends, the shape of that structure remains. It retains the common sense that legitimizes the hierarchy.
And that common sense is what makes it so hard to see the walls. We just think, oh, that's just how the world is.
Correct. It creates a reality where inequality feels natural rather than engineered. If you see a dilapidated school in a black neighborhood, common sense might tell you it's because of the neighborhood, the people, the culture.
Right.
But a structural analysis tells you it's because of the funding formula, the tax base, the history of redlining, the highway that was built through it. It's the architecture.
Which moves us perfectly into the second section of our analysis, the narrative and legitimization layer, or as I was thinking of it, the decor. Because if the structure is built on oppression, you need a really, really nice coat of paint to cover that up in a modern democracy.
And the paint of choice, according to these authors, specifically Steven Steinberg and Howard Wahneema, is colorblindness.
This is where it gets really interesting, because colorblindness is usually presented as the ultimate anti-racist goal. You hear it all the time. I don't see color, I just see people.
It sounds like the ideal.
It does. But Steinberg and Wahneema argue that this narrative is actually a mechanism to preserve the structure, not dismantle it.
Steinberg has a term for this. He calls it the liberal retreat. He traces this shift from the civil rights era to the post-civil rights era. The narrative shifted to say, okay, we passed the Civil Rights Act, we passed the Voting Rights Act, the structure is fixed, the playing field is level now.
So if the playing field is legally level, but black people are still poor or incarcerated at higher rates?
Then the system says, that must be your fault.
Right, it's on you.
Exactly. It shifts the blame from the architecture to the occupant. If the system is now colorblind, then any failure has to be individual. It's your culture, your behavior, your family structure. Steinberg points to what he calls the hidden agenda of politicians like William Julius Wilson and Daniel Patrick Moynihan.
The hidden agenda. This is the idea that you can't sell policies that explicitly help black people to white voters. Is that right?
Yes. This is the incentive structure of political expediency. They argued that because of white resentment, you have to hide assistance for black people inside universal programs.
So you don't call it a program to address the legacy of housing discrimination. You call it a housing program for all Americans.
And you hope some of the benefits trickle down. Steinberg argues this is a retreat. It's an admission that the political system refuses to address the specific historical injury of racism.
It's a form of political gaslighting, isn't it? You're telling a group of people, we can't help you directly because it will upset the neighbors, so we'll fix the sidewalk for everyone and hope you benefit.
And in doing so, it erases history. It claims the system is neutral now, which effectively locks in all the advantages and disadvantages gained during the centuries when it was anything but neutral.
It's like starting a Monopoly game 4 hours late and being told the rules are now exactly the same for everyone.
That's a great analogy. And Toni Morrison has this profound anecdote in her essay about the pressure to smooth over that uncomfortable reality. It's about the very last sentence of her novel, Beloved.
Oh, I made a note of this. This was about her editor, right?
Yes. So in the published version of Beloved, the final phrase is, "Certainly no clamor for a kiss." Morrison reveals in the essay that this was not her original line. Her editor suggested the change. He wanted a better word, a smoother word.
And Morrison struggled with this.
She did. She really struggled with it because she realized that her original word, which she doesn't explicitly name but she implies was somehow wrong or rough, was actually the only word that fit the structural reality of the book. The pressure from her editor and even from a friend she consulted was to find a word that was more aesthetically pleasing, more correct.
But the reality of slavery, the reality that Beloved is excavating, the reality of the race house, it isn't pleasing. It isn't smooth.
It's not smooth at all. It's jagged. It's brutal. And she realized that the wrong word was the only one that truly fit. But the system, the publishing industry, literary standards, reader expectations, it pushes for the better word. It pushes for the version of the story that doesn't scratch the reader's throat on the way down.
That is the narrative layer at work right there, smoothing over the rough edges of history to make it more palatable for the majority.
Which creates this political twilight zone. Black Americans become consigned to this space where they are invisible in policy because all policy must now be colorblind, but they are hypervisible when it comes to punishment.
Which is the perfect segue to the machinery. We have the architecture, which is oppression as a core structure. We have the decor, which is the narrative of colorblindness and politeness. Now we need to look at the operational mechanisms, specifically the law.
This is Section 3. And, well, Kimberly Crenshaw and Neil Gotanda provide a just devastating analysis here. We often think of the law as a neutral referee, but Crenshaw argues the judiciary is actually one of the main architects. The law doesn't just reflect society, it actively constructs race.
How does it do that?
Crenshaw draws a direct line from Plessy v. Ferguson, the infamous separate but equal case from 1896 to modern affirmative action cases like Richmond v. Cronson in 1989.
Now, hold on. Most listeners, myself included, would think those are polar opposites. Plessy is like the textbook example of bad segregationist law. Cronson is modern jurisprudence about equality. How can they be connected?
It seems completely counterintuitive, but they are connected through the operational mechanism of formal equality. In Plessy, the Supreme Court argued that as long as the train cars were technically equal, separating people by race wasn't discrimination. They treated black and white people as formally equal, completely ignoring the social reality that segregation was designed to subordinate and degrade black people.
They pretended the law existed in a vacuum, with no history or context.
And Crenshaw argues the court does the exact same thing in Richmond v. Cronson. In that case, the city of Richmond, which was 50% black, but was awarding less than 1% of its construction contracts to minority-owned businesses.
Less than 1%, wow.
It's a shocking number. So the city tried to fix this. They created a program to set aside 30% of contracts for minority firms, a pretty direct remedy. The Supreme Court struck it down.
Why? I mean, that seems like a clear attempt to fix a massive documented disparity.
Because they applied the same logic of formal equality. They said that treating black businesses differently to help them was just as unconstitutional as treating them differently to hurt them.
So helping is the same as hurting.
In the eyes of this legal logic, yes. They argue that treating different things the same is the definition of equality.
That brings up the Anatole France quote she uses. I love this quote. It's something like, "The law in its majestic equality forbids the rich as well as the poor to sleep under bridges."
It's the perfect encapsulation of the concept. By treating everyone the same in a society that is foundationally unequal, the law simply reinforces the inequality. If you say it is illegal for anyone to steal bread, that law applies to the billionaire and the starving child equally. But who does it actually punish?
Only the starving child.
Right. Crenshaw argues that by declaring colorblindness as the highest legal standard, the Supreme Court has effectively immunized the racial status quo from being fixed. Any attempt to remedy past injustice is framed as a new injustice.
It's a brilliant mechanism of containment. It says, we will protect your civil rights. You can sit in the same train car, but we will ignore your social rights, your ability to actually get a contract, build wealth, or, survive.
And Neil Gotanda takes this analysis even further by looking at how the legal system handles those who don't fit neatly into the black-white binary. He analyzes the model minority myth through the lens of two very famous judges, Judge Joyce Carlin and Judge Lancito.
Okay, two huge cases from the 90s. Judge Carlin presided over the trial of Soon Ja-doo, a Korean store owner who killed a black teenager, Latasha Harlins. And Judge Ito, of course, presided over the O.J. Simpson trial.
Gotanda argues that the legal system uses Asian Americans as intermediate categories to stabilize the black-white binary. In the Soon Ja-doo case, Judge Carlin sentenced Do, who shot a 15-year-old girl in the back of the head over a dispute about a bottle of orange juice, to probation. No jail time.
That sentence sparked massive outrage in Los Angeles. It was one of the major triggers for the LA uprisings in '92.
Absolutely. And Gotanda analyzes Carlin's sentencing colloquy, the speech she gave explaining her sentence. He argues she humanized Do by leaning heavily into the model minority stereotype, the hardworking, frightened immigrant shopkeeper, while simultaneously demonizing the victim, Latasha Harlins, using coded stereotypes of black criminality and aggression.
So the law used the model minority figure to justify the devaluation of black life.
Yes. He calls it racial triangulation. It pits the good minority against the bad minority in a way that protects the white center of the legal system. And then you look at Judge Ito in the O.J. case. Gotanda describes him as the technocrat.
Judge Ito was fascinating because everyone remembers the circus of that trial, but Gotanda suggests Ito was cast in a very specific role.
The system needed a racial intermediary. Think about it. You had a black celebrity defendant, a mostly white prosecution, and a city on the verge of a racial explosion. A white judge might have looked biased. A black judge might have looked biased. Judge Ito, as an Asian American, represented the system's desire for someone neutral, someone who wasn't black or white.
A referee who wasn't on either team.
But the moment Ito showed any personality or, acknowledged his own Japanese-American heritage, the moment he wasn't just a blank slate, he was attacked by the media and the legal establishment.
I remember that.
He was only allowed to be there as long as he performed the role of a colorblind technocrat. This shows how the legal machinery creates these powerful incentives for neutrality signaling. The system has to appear fair to maintain its legitimacy, even while its operational mechanisms produce deeply, deeply skewed outcomes.
Which leads us to the most brutal of those outcomes. Section 4. The feedback loops. We're talking about the punishment industry. And for this, we have to turn to Angela Davis's essay.
This is where the structural analysis becomes really a matter of life and death. Davis argues that the prison system is not a solution to crime. We have to get that idea out of our heads to understand her point.
It's not designed to solve crime.
No. She says the prison system is a mechanism for managing a surplus population.
Surplus population? I mean, that is a chilling phrase.
It is. And it's an economic term. As the economy shifted, as manufacturing jobs left the inner cities during deindustrialization, you were left with a large group of people, specifically black men and increasingly black women, for whom the formal economy had no use. The system needs a place to put the people it has economically abandoned.
So the myth of black crime becomes the justification for their removal.
Correct. Davis points out the horrifyingly elegant feedback loop. First, structural inequality creates poverty. Second, the system criminalizes the survival strategies of the poor, the informal drug economy, petty theft, and so on.
Right.
Third, this leads to high incarceration rates for black people.
And then fourth, those high incarceration rates are pointed to as proof that black people are inherently more criminal.
Which then justifies more policing in their communities and less social support. It's a perfectly self-confirming loop. It generates its own justification. In the text, Davis highlights a staggering data point, a 78% increase in the incarceration of black women during the period she was studying.
And she makes a crucial point that the punishment industry has become an economic engine in its own right.
A massive one. It devours resources that are comparable to the military budget. It provides jobs for guards, lucrative construction contracts for new prisons, a steady source of revenue for the rural, often white, towns where these prisons are typically built. The system has a powerful economic incentive to keep people locked up.
And a political one. Davis points out something that's really hard to grapple with. that even black politicians like Senator Carol Moseley Braun felt compelled to support the massive crime bills of the 1990s.
That's the crisis in perception again turned inward. The logic of racism, the narrative of black crime, is so entrenched that even black leaders felt that sweeping the streets was the only survival option for their communities.
It's an impossible choice.
It is. When you are drowning and you ask for a lifeguard, but the state only sends a cop, eventually you accept the cop because it's the only help being offered.
It's a trap. If you don't support the crime bill, your community isn't safe from immediate harm. If you do support the crime bill, your community is further criminalized and warehoused for generations.
And Davis argues this is why we have to look at things like the three strikes laws and the war on drugs, not as crime control policies, but as race control policies. It is the structural containment of a population that the House has no other room for.
So we have the House, we have the decor, we have the law, we have the prisons. The question that hangs over all of this is, why does it still stand? Why is this house so hard to tear down? Which brings us to Section 5, persistence analysis.
This is the critical question. And Katanda and Patricia Williams point to the concept of inertia and whiteness. Katanda talks about the transparency of whiteness.
Transparency, what does he mean by that?
He means that, for the most part, white people in the U.S. do not see themselves as having a race. They are just people. They are the default human being. Their perspective is just the normal perspective.
So to them, the House isn't a White House, it's just the House.
Exactly. So to dismantle the House feels like an attack on normality itself. It means acknowledging that the House was, in fact, built for them on a foundation that excluded others.
And that's deeply uncomfortable.
It's more than uncomfortable. From that perspective, it's viewed as an existential threat. And this ties into what Kimberly Crenshaw discusses as the catch-22 of victimhood. This is a key mechanism for persistence.
Okay, lay that out for us.
The law, as we discussed, requires you to prove you are a victim of specific intentional discrimination to get any kind of relief.
Right. You have to find the email with the slur in it. You have to show the smoking gun.
But at the same time, if you claim victimhood, the dominant culture, the culture shaped by that colorblind narrative, dismisses you for playing the victim. You're told you aren't being a self-reliant individual. You're a whiner.
You're damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you don't claim victimhood, you get no legal remedy for the structural problems you face. If you do, you lose all social legitimacy and are told it's your own fault for having a bad attitude.
It's a perfect trap. And it protects the structure. This creates what the book calls a risky symmetry. For the dominant group, dismantling the house feels like a huge loss, a loss of home, of safety, of predictability. For them, the system works. It protects their property, their status, their sense of self. To change it feels like inviting chaos.
And they can always fall back on the ideology of the racial market, the belief that the market is neutral, and if black people aren't succeeding, well, it must be their own failure to compete.
Which completely and utterly ignores the centuries of wealth extraction and systemic disadvantage. It's like stealing someone's shoes, forcing them to start a marathon a mile behind everyone else, and then saying, well, the market has spoken. You're just a slow runner.
This brings us to Section 6, interconnection. Because none of this is happening in a vacuum. Race isn't separate from class or from gender.
No, they are nested systems. Lubiano has a really sharp analysis of how even resistance movements, like some forms of black nationalism, often fail because they end up replicating the state's forms.
What do you mean by that?
Well, they might adopt the same patriarchal structures, for instance, policing women's behavior or enforcing a rigid form of masculinity, essentially trying to build a black house that looks just like the White House, but with different occupants.
So she's arguing that you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's blueprints.
Precisely. And this leads to the ultimate crisis in perception. We are trained systemically to look at incidents. We look at the O.J. Simpson trial. We look at a specific riot. We look at a specific viral video of a police encounter.
Instead of looking at the architecture, at housing policy, at legal precedent, at the labor market.
There is a haunting anecdote from the geographer Mike Davis, which is cited in the text, that summarizes this entire crisis perfectly. It's about something he called the bag lady-proof trash cage.
I remember reading this. It's about a restaurant in Los Angeles, right?
Yes. A fancy seafood restaurant on the west side spent $12,000 to build a cage around their garbage dumpster.
$12,000.
And this wasn't just any cage. It was made of 3/4-inch steel rods with heavy-duty alloy locks and vicious, outturned spikes on top.
And this was all just to keep homeless people from eating the discarded food.
Specifically to protect, and I'm quoting here, moldering fish heads and stale French fries. That cage is the physical manifestation of the entire system we are discussing. We live in a society that will invest $12,000 in protecting refuse rather than feeding people.
Wow. That image, the cage with spikes to protect garbage from hungry people,
Yeah,
it brings it all home, doesn't it?
it connects the abstract logic of the underclass with the concrete logic of the bag lady cage. It is a logic of disposal and containment. The same system that builds that cage builds the prisons. It's the exact same blueprint.
And the crisis in perception is that we walk past that cage and we're trained to think, oh, the restaurant is just protecting its private property.
Right. We don't see the monstrous prioritization of property over human life that it represents. We see an incident, not the architecture.
So when we step back, what does this all mean for us today? We're looking at a text from the late 90s, but it feels like it could have been written this morning.
The present-day implications are incredibly stark. The text basically predicted the total weaponization of colorblindness in the legal system. We see that today in the dismantling of affirmative action, in the constant attacks on so-called critical race theory, in the way that the word woke is used as a pejorative.
It's the new racism. It doesn't need racial slurs or white hoods.
No. It only requires the neutral, dispassionate application of laws in a structurally unequal society. Zoning laws, sentencing guidelines, contract law. If you apply neutral rules to a tilted game board, the pieces will always slide to the bottom.
And as Toni Morrison argues, we cannot just redecorate the house. We can't just paint over the cracks.
We have to understand the blueprints. We have to know why the door is locked from the outside. The challenge of this book, the challenge of this analysis, is to stop obsessing over the occupants of the house, moralizing about their behavior, their culture, their tone, and to start looking, really looking at the architects and the blueprints.
It's a sobering analysis, but an absolutely necessary one. I guess if you don't know you're in a house, you can't ever find the door.
And you certainly can't begin to think about how to renovate it.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.